I like the dog. It's friendly.
Before we get into the video, I'd like to give a quick shout out to channel favourite Veronica and James, who were kind enough to buy me a coffee.
How do you like your coffee?
Alone.
If you'd like to support this channel, you can do that by liking and subscribing, but if you'd like to go a step further, you can do so by buying me a coffee, and as a thank you, you'll receive a shout out in my next video. I'll leave a link to my coffee account and Patreon in the description box below. And now, back to the video. So I stumbled across The Swimmer about a month or so ago. Somebody mentioned it on Twitter and I had never heard of it before, and it's an absolute gem. I think knowing very little or nothing about the film really helps with the mysterious nature of the story, and I'd honestly suggest going into it blind too. Not because anything particularly shocking happens as such, but because the slow release of information and the existential quality of the film is heightened when you have no clue what's going on. So I'd actually recommend, if you haven't seen the film, pause this video, seek it out, and then once you've seen it, come back. For those of you who have seen the film, let's dive in. A seemingly successful and strapping ad man called Ned Merrill, played by Bert Lancaster, is visiting a friend when he notices how many swimming pools have popped up recently in their upscale suburb. Ned suddenly decides that he'd like to travel the 8 miles back to his own home by swimming across every pool in town. He calls it the Lucinda River, after his wife. We know almost immediately that something is up, but we don't know what, and before we know it, Ned's journey becomes a harrowing experience. At each house he stops at to swim, he's confronted with a reminder of his failures and a past he doesn't want to confront. The film is directed by Frank Perry, who's possibly best known for directing Mommy Dearest.
But nobody ever said that life was fair, Tina. I'm bigger and I'm faster. I will always beat you.
This film is based on a short story called The Swimmer by John Cheever. It was first published in The New Yorker in 1964, and it was hailed for its surrealism. Inspired by the classic Greek myth of Narcissus and what I think is a healthy dose of Dante's Inferno, each swimming pool leads him further and further into darkness. Writer John Cheever said, "When I began, the story was to have been a simple one about Narcissus. I started with the image of that boy looking into the water. Then I thought, it's absurd to limit him to a tight mythological plot, being trapped in his own image in a single pool. This man loves swimming, so in my first version, I let him out, and he swam an immense number of pools, 30 of them. But then I began to narrow it down, and something began happening. It was growing cold and quiet. It was turning into winter." The short story is still available online, and I'll leave a link to it in the description box. It's definitely worth a read. It's very short. It's the bare bones of the story that we see in The Swimmer, but it's all there, gripping onto the skeleton. And obviously the film adds a lot more detail to flesh it out. Bert Lancaster is the perfect actor for this role. I know there were actors like William Holden who were approached to play the part, but I think Lancaster is just fantastic. He actually described the film as Death of a Salesman in Trunks, and that makes sense. Much like the Arthur Miller play, The Swimmer is seen as an allegory for the American dream. This utopian idea that everyone has the same opportunities for success, and if you just work hard and use some initiative, you will be rewarded. I must admit, when I watched The Swimmer, I came away thinking it was more about a man in denial that the bloom is off the rose. This guy is not who he thought he was, and he realises at this point in his life, his best days are behind him. I suppose I was thinking about the film as more of an exploration of gender and what it means for a man to lose everything, and how instead of being crushed by outside forces, his destruction was of his own doing. He can't blame anyone but himself, and that's just too much of a blow to his masculinity.
I am a man! I am a man, you know! You know!
And so he clings to the physical because it's all he has left. Lancaster does such a fantastic job of portraying the wounded bravado. Ned dives deep into the denial that everything is just fine. His wife's at home waiting for him, and his daughters are out playing tennis. He's a virile man with hopes and dreams. It's really a deconstruction of machismo. I think this is why the film holds up as well as it does today. I personally see it as a man who thought he had the world in a string, only to discover that he didn't have the control he thought he did. And men losing their perception of control is a theme that's just as relevant today as it was 60 years ago. Alcohol in The Swimmer is a constant, and everyone's doing it.
I drank too much last night.
Oh, don't be silly. Want a martini? I've got them all made.
As one of your more distinguished gatecrashers, do I rate a drink?
Literary critic James E. O'Hara, in John Cheever, A Study of the Short Fiction, wrote, "The countless drinks along the way are part of a larger pattern of willful oblivion, repressing problems so troubling that they cannot be raised to the surface of consciousness. We now see that, like Chekhovian characters, Neddy Merrill has in fact chosen to lose touch with the truth rather than suffer under its crushing weight." I think that's a spot-on interpretation, and the only thing I would add is the added layer of alcohol consumption within society at the time. His friends and acquaintances are almost enablers of his delusion by constantly offering him a drink. In 1968, it probably wouldn't have occurred to someone that a man who's clearly suffering from some sort of issue maybe shouldn't be drinking. Back then, a scotch on the rocks was the go-to for most problems. I cannot overstate how much I love the way this film is shot. The bright colours at the swimming pool, the summer sky, the beautiful autumnal leaves, the changing of the seasons coinciding with the slowly deteriorating Ned is such a beautiful touch. It's clearly autumn when the film starts, but when Ned is at the first pool, it's a bright and warm sunny day. But as Ned gets closer to his home, he starts to feel the cold. He shivers and stumbles his way back to his house. As he approaches the house, a storm starts to build, and when he finally gets to his house, he sees it's abandoned. Ned is truly alone, and as the rain builds, he cowers in the doorway, finally facing the truth. I think The Swimmer is a film that was slightly ahead of its time, and perhaps that's why it didn't receive a better audience reception. This surreal and mysterious story was maybe just a bit too ambiguous for moviegoers at the time, although critics did enjoy it. It also has a pretty bleak ending, which, if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know I love a bleak ending. However, not everybody does, and I guess that put a lot of people off. They found it maybe to be a bit too depressing. If you've seen The Swimmer, let me know in the comments if you liked it. It's a bit of a rare gem, not often discussed, but I genuinely loved it. Fun fact, The Swimmer was comedian Joan Rivers' film debut as an actress. And this is a film that, of all people, Gilbert Gottfried was a fan of.
This was a movie I was just watching TV late at night years ago. And it's one of those, like, treats that you get. Like, this, I never heard of this before then. And it's one of those weird movies, those little movies that they used to make late 60s through the 70s that it seems like they forgot how to make nowadays.
Right.
And it would never make it to a theater nowadays.
Right.
If you've made it to the end of this video, hello, and thanks for watching. I know it's been a while since I uploaded, but I've been going through a bit of a rough time with my health, and so it's been kind of physically and mentally a lot, and that doesn't really lend itself well to making videos. But I'm back for now, and I just want to say thanks for sticking around and not letting my channel die on the vine. I've got a couple of cool videos lined up and I can't wait to share them with you. Anyway, I hope you have a great day, stay hydrated, water your plants, and stay spooky.
I'm going to give the people what they want. Sensation, horror, shock. Send them out in the streets to tell their friends how wonderful it is to be scared to death.